Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I am joined by Michael Wheeler, otherwise known as Grizzled Grogdog. Almost forgot your nickname, which is hilarious since I use it more often than the other one. From the boys over at Pack Mentality, and we are here for an interview or a pre-interview. You guys will be watching this after the game, but we are doing it pre for the MWS finals for the 2024 edition. So welcome.
Thanks, mate. Yeah, 12 hours to go till we start getting the fate decks firing. It's exciting to be here. Big fan of your content and your channel in general. And so it happened to work out so perfectly that in assisting yours and you assisting ours, I just happened to get to the finals. So it was fitting to be here and talk shop for a while. So thanks for having me on.
Oh, I appreciate it, and it's funny that it took the finals for us to actually do something together. I mean, it's because it's your content's pretty much the only Malifaux content that I actually check out, which is no offense to anyone else, but that's just what I do, and then we've ended up here, so that's kind of great.
Yeah, I love that. Next year, the year of the collab.
yeah. But it's just the time zones, as you say, do make that awkward usually. So, but it's nice, and I am pleased that we get to chat, if not at least play. So that's cool. All right, we're going to dive in with some sort of slightly non-Malifaux stuff, then some general wargaming stuff, then some Malifaux stuff, and then straight into the actual game itself. So that's the rough format we're going on. So first of all, I'm well aware who you are, but maybe some people are tuning in for the first time, or they're trying to have a look at Malifaux and having a look at the MWS, for example. So tell us a little bit about where you're from, and maybe like how many years of wargaming do you have under your belt?
Yeah, by all means. I did my schooling here in New Zealand, sort of my intermediate and high schooling, and I was in South Africa prior to that. Dived right into wargaming, as a lot of people do with Warhammer 40,000. Back then, I thought the Ultramarines were the main faction, and then Space Marines were a subset. It's actually the opposite, but you learn these things the hard way. Played a whole bunch of different armies in that with horrific paint jobs and obviously a tight budget, being a schoolboy. But I had a great amount of fun, and we'd go to our beach batches, and while we'd be swimming on one day, we'd also be playing Warhammer the next day. So I grew a deep affinity for tabletop gaming. Really enjoyed that. I remember early in those days using Vassal for Warhammer as well, which is amusing to come full circle and now see it in Malifaux so frequently. Eventually I got semi-serious about Warhammer 40,000 playing Dark Eldar. Really enjoyed that hit and run play style and the glass cannon-esque nature of what that army is trying to do, as well as the spikes. Big fan of spikes. So I really enjoyed that. The more evil, the better. It was perfect for me. But at some stage, I was, I think it was 7th edition, which was pretty rough if you were not Eldari or Tau for most people. And I was sort of trolling the forums. I was like, hey, what else is there, I wonder? And I remember a gentleman in one of the gaming groups talking up Malifaux and how amazing it is, because he was also a Dark Eldar player. I thought, I'll have a look at this. Looked vaguely intriguing. So I went around to have a test game, I guess you might say, on one of the open days one of the local TOs was running, which was pretty cool. I enjoyed that. Got my first crew. My wife at the time also got herself a crew, and we sort of clashed a bit with that, which was good fun. And then I really haven't looked back. That was very sort of middling M2E 2nd edition when that occurred.
And what was that first crew that you picked up?
Yeah, so my first crew was Karis. I really liked the idea of fire and really fast movement. There were some really cute tricks. I think some of those tricks were what kept me in Malifaux. I remember you could set fire to your own birds and then fling them forward, and then the fire would dissipate and they drop ski markers. Obviously, 2nd edition is very different to 3rd edition, but it's those cute little interactions that I first discovered and really enjoyed that I think sold me on the game in general. So there's still always a part of me that smiles whenever I see Karis and the Wildfire crew on the table, or in Malifaux, on the Vassal, because they're still very near and dear to my heart. And so when I have to beat Karis, it's bittersweet. Among other things which were bittersweet were a lot of dead man hands action, taking out my Ramos and my Nicodim. I had switched across to Resurrectionists. because no one was playing them here. And so I basically lost half of my crews when we went to Dead Man's Hand, which was pretty rough to acclimatize to.
Oh, that is. I mean, it's funny because I haven't suffered any Dead Man's Hand stuff. I came in M3E, so and yet I still think that there are certain things that should be, namely Seamus. And it's like,
you won't hear any argument from me.
well, exactly, but people say like, well, you haven't suffered a dead man, like it's not happened to you, it's not happened to your faction, so you can't go calling for it on other people's factions. And I was like, all right, pick a Thunder's Master, go ahead, like we've got a deep enough bench, we can take it.
I'll trade you.
yeah. I was like, yeah, you can genuinely pick anyone but Lynn. And they were like, no, you can't start having like, immunity with one of the, yeah.
She's too new. They wouldn't cut her.
I figured that as well, but that was if you're trying to claim that you can take any Thunder's Master except for this one, well, it sounds a little bit less legitimate.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a stint in South Africa and then the majority in New Zealand. Do you remember any part of that South African experience, or was that so long ago it was sort of preschool that it doesn't even register anymore?
It was my primary school, so up till about 10. So
okay.
Still many fond memories there, of course, as my childhood with family and wonderful vacations and beautiful tropics. New Zealand's a little bit less tropical. So still many pleasant memories there. And I have had the good fortune of going back at least once a few years back, which was phenomenal. So.
All right. And if you were forced to, if someone said, right, you can't pick South Africa and you can no longer stay in New Zealand, where would you set your sights? Where would you be moving to?
That's an interesting question. For a time now, I've been looking at Perth as somewhere to potentially visit and or live anyway. So maybe that would be something I have very, very close family there. I guess if we were to subtract family from it and just say more in a general sense, I would love to go and experience Central Europe. I think either perhaps in your neck of the woods or Germany or something like that, a chance to practice a second language and, be slightly mocked, but learn the fun and hard way to do that. I think that would be a good experience. I have very fun memories of my time when I was in Russia, trying my hand at speaking a bit and struggling, but still trying. It was good fun. And so a working holiday or something like that would be good, and potentially establish on the long term if I enjoy it.
Yeah, I feel your pain with the language thing. I really do. There are some painful bits that you've got to get through to get there. All right. So then coming back to wargaming, and you gave us a pretty reasonable run up to how you ended up in Malifaux. Which system, or maybe not even a tabletop system, maybe a computer game or another game, which games led to the style that you would say you have in Malifaux? So, for example, to give you an example, I go down the middle and punch people in the head. Which game did that come from? Well, probably from Command & Conquer. That was my style in Command & Conquer. Very quick timing attacks that just went right down the middle at the most powerful time. I would say that maybe that was sort of an influence, but also definitely War Machine, where it was we were going more specific. Tabletop. War Machine was my big war gaming influence, and again, it was mainly just get everything ready, mash in the middle, and see who comes out on top. So what would you say influenced your style?
It's a really interesting question and interesting examples you give. I'd say the two things which influenced me most are Magic the Gathering, in which certainly when I was an edgy teenager, I liked being the blue-black control mage who everyone hates. Naturally, your fun is to deny other people their fun. So a lot of control elements, a lot of ensuring you can develop your game plan while inhibiting theirs. I have since then added other colors to my Magic pie chart. Don't worry, I'm more of a balanced mage now. The other game would be StarCraft 2. When I was in high school and in uni, I took it quite seriously, played a lot. In fact, it was quite amusing. In uni, one of the lecturers was a massive fan of StarCraft 2 and actually did lectures for it. So we had lecture halls for learning about the game at a pro level. And so I fell in love with that. Very, very mechanically demanding and difficult, very, very fast. But there is underlying all of that a sort of rock, paper, scissors kind of strategic angle that you approach every game and every matchup with. How much you want to spend your energy macroing to build up your economy and your map control is one thing, and then how much you want to micro, which is the individual small things you're doing with your units to overcome your opponents. And I see a lot of that taking place in Malifaux itself, where you can have a more strategic grand view of like, if I work backwards from the end of turn 5, how would I have won? Like, what needs to be true on turns 1, 2, and 3, and 4 so that turn 5 looks optimal for me? That's more of your macro style. Like, this is the zoomed out telescope. And then on a micro level, here in this intimate little melee, we find ourselves with Nakima and McCabe and Corpse Curator and some dynamic of wounds. And it's like, which one needs to go first? Which card matters most? Do I risk going with this model knowing he might turn around and kill McCabe and I'm obviously lost McCabe, that's awful? Or do I go with McCabe and accept that he will probably kill the Corpse Curator before it goes? And that's more of the micro angle, which trying to balance both is tough because you only have so much brain power. StarCraft kind of forces you to get good at both, or try to. And so I think that's been something I enjoy and have had a great benefit from whilst playing Malifaux at a high level. So
I think it's interesting that you mentioned like brain power as a resource. I'm thinking as sort of in my head, I was following along with your example. I also played some StarCraft, and I was thinking, but what would be because in theory you've got unlimited resources, but you don't. So I was thinking also you've got clock. So in your example where you've got this micro element of, right, okay, I understand my basic strategy. I understand how I wish to get to turn 5 and have more points than my opponent. But right now I need to solve this mess. And so it's the equivalent of sort of doing blink micro with some stalkers and trying to figure out, well, how am I doing that versus, oh God, something's on fire over there and I've not noticed. So I was thinking, well, how does that translate into a turn-based game? Well, it translates in terms of, as you say, brain power. You simply could not deal with this very difficult melee here and also be cognizant of the charge ranges that were possible over here, maybe with a push from something else. And you're like, okay, well, if my opponent was focused on that, if their strategy, if their path to turn 5 was I need to kill that schemer more than I need to win this melee, then that's quite a good comparison to make, I would say. Also, important question for Ire.
My life's for Ire, yes. Absolutely.
Excellent. So were you a Protoss player as well, or are you...
Yes.
Excellent,
I tinkered with a little bit of Zerg early on, but I quickly found Protoss to be my preference. The more advanced and elite and spells. Love that. So
excellent. And so speaking of preferences, what got you onto Explorers? You're sitting here on the Explorer side of the matchup. What got you into that?
I picked the best faction by far. I'm happy to say that. I love Explorers. I didn't know it at the time. I picked it literally because Weird spoiled the imagery for Calypso as the first Explorers model that I'm aware of. It was just this random artwork of Calypso. Didn't know Dr. B, didn't know what the crew was, nothing. I literally just saw this random Where's Waldo or whatever those newsletters things that they have. It's like, here's something. And I couldn't even tell you what it was, necessarily the wording of it, but I just remember this artwork of Calypso and it described as this sort of pseudo undersea in caves, like anywhere exploring vessel that scientists use to go and traverse the wilderness. And I thought, that is so badass. Like, there's a walking submarine, like, sign me up. At the time as well, it is colored by the fact I had been playing reses with no good constructs for a very long time and struggling against armor. And I was like, that looks amazing. Sign me up for the walking tank submarine thing. Like, I don't care what it is or if it's good. I just really want to play that model. And so naturally, when we all found out a bit more about these keywords and it's the EVS keyword, I love them even more because they're all explorers and scientists. And so that was like my angle in, I just want to play Maxine and her crew, and especially Dr. Beeb and Calypso, as many times as I can, just to see what that's about, which was a good choice because they've been extremely rewarding keyword and as a whole faction as well to be playing. So it was a good decision to open that article and see that Calypso artwork.
It's just occurred to me that I don't know what EVS means. Do you know?
Yes, EVS stands for Explorer Vessel Superior, which is the name of Maxine's ship, which was, I believe, given to her by her dad, I want to say. She was like 5 majors and degrees and such, like super, super well studied and known across, I believe, multiple universities. And so for her research grant or something, they were sent basically to Malifaux. They had like this ship in Malifaux with this whole international suite of scientists and explorers and people of renown who came with her. And so that's how she employs people from all sorts of walks of life. We have Kia, who I believe her influences are from the other side, the Ethiopian crew. We have Harata, who's obviously a New Zealand Maori, which is, perfect New Zealand. Her husband, Orville, I believe, is of Portuguese descent. So it's just this wonderful international cocktail of like well-read people, which I just find really interesting. So,
and I guess it gave them a good excuse to have pretty much whatever they wanted within the keyword. They had this sort of like a very good background story that allowed them to do what they wanted and then therefore make the keyword interesting. They weren't sort of locked into, but that guy's not a zombie, therefore he can't be in this keyword. It's like, no, we can have a very well-educated zombie. Yeah, as long as it fits the mold. Gotcha. All right, cool.
Exactly.
And did you play any faction prior to that?
So I went Arcanists, Reses. Yeah, Arcanists, Reses, and then Explorers in that order. Arcanists was just Karis, Mayfing, and Ramos. And then Reses was Molly and a bit of Seamus, because everyone had Seamus.
Sure.
And Nicodem, who was then removed, sadly. So after doing many filthy things with Nicodem and Ramos both, and those removed, we then eventually migrated in sort of early-ish when Explorers were announced. I was like, cool, that's me. That's my new thing now.
Okay. And what was your least favorite faction and why?
Do I tell Drayson that Thunders? No, I don't think it's Thunders on that level. I guess depends, as your question, dislike the faction like, just generally or dislike playing against them?
It's the former.
It might be Arcanists, to be honest, as the least, like the one I like the least now, which sounds strange because I started on them, but they just don't seem to have any theme as to why they're a unified faction anymore. Back in the day, it was like, we're anti-guild and we're trying to be like smuggling and like stand up for the workers' rights. But then like Tony betrayed Ramos and sold them off Earthside to like the guild anyway. So it's like, I don't quite understand what your motivations are anymore as a collective.
Right. They lost some faction identity somehow.
Yeah, I don't really know what loosely binds these people together. If they were all like magic users, then you might understand them as, okay, they're kind of like all doing their elemental thing, but they kind of shoehorned all the magic into just Sundeep and like a few tricks with Colette. Now it just feels like I don't really know what binds these people together. So I guess Arcanists, if that's the scope of that question.
Yeah. No, that's a perfectly solid answer. Yeah. And if so, as you mentioned, sort of like having some glue that binds a faction together. If we were in this magical world where a new faction was being tested, and this isn't, Mark IV, it's just a pure hypothetical. But if we had a new blank page faction sitting there ready to go, and you were sort of going, "Oh, right, is this something I might be interested in?" What would that like? Can you think of either like a faction identity or a mechanic type? I know earlier in the interview you mentioned spikes and or some control elements or things like that. But what sort of elements would draw you to a new faction if they were working on one?
Yeah, I mean, print a guy with a spike and I'm like already interested and probably going to buy it, but hopefully it has some theme and some storyline behind it which makes sense. I guess in terms of mechanics, I really like the mechanics where you have to make trade-offs, and so quite recently they've had some models with things like the defensive reflexes trigger, which I really like. You do less damage on average, but you get shielded, so you can make a trade-off, and I feel like those kinds of triggers and those kinds of abilities, the more you can put them in the game, the more decisions you give players and the more trade-offs there are. So another example would be like Tiri's upgrades, where you can pick either, not both. Price of progress, you get this cool bonus, but it costs you health. anything like that, I would really, really like to see like pushed further. Maybe an element of gambling would be really cool as well. I think Lynch covers like one half of gambling, but it would be
Sure.
really cool to see other things where like during your activation, when you declare an action, similar to like Price of Progress or Predatory Instinct, you can declare that you want to gamble for your attack or whatever. And it might be the case where instead of on like in an opposed duel, if you equal their stat, you're on a double neg. But instead, if you equal their stat, you're on like a single neg or something like that. But they, I don't know, like if you don't it'll match them, then you're on a double neg or something like that. Would just be interesting. I don't know how you'd balance that, but something along those lines would be interesting to play with, to give you more chances to make decisions, which naturally rewards people who know the game better. But at the same time, it's just interesting. I don't know how exactly you'd micromanage that.
I think for example, Price of Progress. I like the idea. I think your answer is solid, which is right. I want to see more decisions that are trade-offs, that are genuinely like, I suffer this in order to gain this, not just, well, I happen to have this. But I think that as a result, just coming back to your Price of Progress, and then we're going to have to move on to the game because of time constraints. But Price of Progress, what I dislike about Price of Progress is any ability that you can Price of Progress which then heals the Price of Progress damage. So I hate being able to Price of Progress for Siphon Life, because that's just free. That's not a price. I realize it is because you could miss, but a good player isn't going to do it if they're going to miss. Like, it's just I don't know.
You're not wrong, but I would say that, I mean, you're probably thinking of Anya 1 and her Tomahawk specifically for that. In that instance, she has 3 other great triggers anyway. So the real price you're paying isn't that you're getting free +1 damage. It's more that you're not getting an excellent other trigger. Surge is good, stun is good, reposition can be game breaking. So yeah, absolutely, you're getting back some of the health that you would spend to +1 damage. But it is only just +1 damage, and you remove the opportunity cost of those other like really good triggers. As I think about it, I don't think anyone else heals themselves due to their own trigger. Like, I think they worded the Glory of Ridley very specifically. So that's the Syndicate trigger, which is heal other Syndicate models. So you can price that, but it doesn't heal you, which feels like...
I was thinking of Manos, actually, was the other one.
Oh, Manos, sure. That's Siphon Life, yeah, okay. He can ping someone else for that as well, right? Not just himself.
Probably. Can Manos do? Yes, he can. Yes.
Yes. Manos do everything. Correct.
So that's how I view that. All right. What's possibly going to happen here is we're very likely to run out of time on the interview, because I had to do a bit of, for the people at home. I had to do a little bit of sound balancing and stuff before, and we've got a 40-minute limit, and we've eaten into some of it. Anyway, so what we might do is, if this call just like gets to the end, we'll figure something out, and you'll host another call basically, because you can. Yeah, we'll figure it out. Don't worry about it. So moving on to the game itself, then. So we have the finals. For the people at home, I'm gonna bring up the map and the pool, and then if I do that and that, we should have a tiny Michael. There we are. Cool. So here is so what we are looking at now is the map Lazy River, and the deployment standard, strategy Cloak and Dagger, and the scheme pool Deathbeds, Sweating Bullets, Information Overload, Take Prisoner, and Ensnare. We now know the lists, so I'll bring those up on screen in a little bit. But going into this, what made you look at that pool and look at your opponent, which in this case is Pope Darpa or Landon Sheehan, and his guild? What made you look at that and say, right, this is Anya again? I know that you've been running her pretty consistently through this tournament, but what drew you to her on this pool?
So I think that this strategy is doable by all explorers, but we don't have a specialist who's really good at Cloak and Dagger. I think like a model like Jin helps, but we don't really have a specialist. So the next question then is like, what is the scheme pool looking like? And I think the scheme pool is really strong for Anya. She can dominate this if you go Anya 2 with the right build against the right faction. Guild is probably not a great Anya 2 place to be, but it's an option. Depends on the matchup. The rest of the schemes are decidedly achievable for Anya 1. If your opponent doesn't have a game plan to stop what you're trying to do, you're going to out-scheme them naturally. With maybe some caveats, a Colette crew might be able to do more than you. That's fair. I do feel like we've got tricks to punish something like Colette if it were Colette anyway, though. But in this instance, it's Guild. We interact better than Guild. There are things like Nelly and Lucifusi who can help. They do sort of bridge that somewhat, but the gap is still there. We're still better at this than them. And so Anya is a really, really good pick here, in my opinion. All of the schemes are achievable, and you can build to deny several of them as well.
So speaking of which, like if we so for more context now, so we now know it's Anya into Dashel,
yes.
And so which two schemes are you eyeing up, and which two schemes are you expecting and thus sort of focused on denying?
So Dashel is flexible and he can do a number of things, but probably the easiest points he will have would be Sweating Bullets and potentially Take Prisoner. I think it's also worth pointing out the dynamic where if we tie, he will win based on seed. Sure. So he is more incentivized to take those easy 1-point schemes, in my view, than I am. I'm more incentivized to take the riskier, harder two VP schemes. So I think something like Take Prisoner, where you can just get a point fairly easily and then just murder everything, really suits him. And so I think Take Prisoner would be fine. And then Sweating Bullets is a natural Guild. Like, they love Guild taking this one. And he has some options to do it and make it really hard to stop. Something like LLC goes a long way to helping his game plan, like, make sure it's easy to deny at the end of the game, because I just can't shift him and he can control that area. So,
Sure. And if we're talking about Take Prisoner for a moment, I haven't looked at the options myself. What would you expect if you were trying to take prisoner against your own crew? Which model would you be thinking? I can probably grab that one, and then maybe it can force it to be on my side table half, and so on and so forth. What?
I think my Catalan Rifleman is fairly exposed. It's not a must-kill model. It can provide a lot of value, but less value when it's engaged in melee, which is what Take Prisoner is trying to do. It's also the kind of model where if it sees 5 turns in a game, the opponent hasn't just lost by default.
Okay.
So, for example, because the way I see the game is like, if you give the Nightcrawler network 5 turns, that player's won the game. It almost doesn't matter what happens, which I know the game isn't that binary, but it's that kind of level of model.
It's pretty
The
close.
Rifleman is not that level of model. It's like, he can contribute. He's a good model. He's useful. If you take him prisoner, that's great. You could then kill him after taking him prisoner, because it would be relatively easy to do that. His stats are also victim stats, so you can easily grab him. And if you were able to push him onto his side of the table, away from my side, then he could definitely get the 2-pointer.
Okay. And if we're looking at Sweating Bullets, then that was the other one that you mentioned. Then is there a model that you'd expect him to be trying to score the first point with?
The Executioner is maybe the too obvious pick for it, because he's got Leadline Coat. He can Soulstone because Dashel's Dashel 2, and he does have some minion healing and things like that available. So this is an option he might take. He also kind of just wants to be controlling the center, because he's a relatively slow body. You can make the Executioner faster. You can ride with me. You've got options. He's not like super slow, but his base movement, especially if he's stunned, which I will be trying to do, he's walking 5. He wants to be central anyway. So I think he's perhaps the obvious choice for Sweating Bullets.
Sure. So for those at home, I'm just going to bring up the crews here so that we know exactly what I've been showing you the pool, but here is the Dashel crew that we're discussing, so potential models and ride with me and so on. We've got the Melissa Core with Expert Marksman. We've got the Nightcrawler network that was mentioned as being a model that's a must kill, and DCU, and then the Lead Line Coat over on Dashel. And then the Anya crew is Anya 1 with Sovereign, Winston, Irina Keen, Hand of Janus, Hosticat, the Catalan Rifleman who's been mentioned, and the Operative. 1 second, I'm going to bring this up. So this, the call will end in a minute. When it does, I'll get in touch with you on Discord and we'll figure it out. Talk to me about the Operative.
It's a good model. It's really good. It has a lot of cool things it does against guard as well. So if Dashiell's nearby, I can stone with my operative. If the dispatcher ever gets close, he can't take the hit, and it has no serene countenance. So I can kill it very easily with the operative.
Okay.
Arson has caught many people off guard. You're just not ready for Arson, and I can even use the dispatcher for Arson at 10 inches away to nuke his whole crew if an opportunity presents itself. He will draw a card for me doing that, but if I'm catching like 3 or 4 models in the pulse, like I will light your whole crew on fire. I will do like basically the Pale Rider damage to the whole crew and burning. It's a nice possibility. Just as this might.
Right, so we will pause the recording. Resuming now, and everything's peachy. Wonderful. So where were we? We were discussing operative sneaky options with Arson and so on and so forth, but no flush with cash. So despite the fact that it had a number of quite serious upsides, you've foregone the flush with cash. What was the thought process?
Yeah, I mean, Severe 5 will kill it. That's a fact. There are many things in his crew which can kill it. Not that different from the Catalan Rifleman also. I feel that positioning is pretty critical. I'll eat my words now if he just dies turn 1 anyway. Yeah, I'll be pretty sad if that happens. But these things can happen, and there are certain trade-offs which are okay. You can also bait models to maybe expose themselves if they really want to go after her. It feels like his main shooting options here are the Mounted Guard, who's stat 5, or stat 6 with Pursue, or it's Melissa. Neither of these ignore cover. Neither of these ignore concealing natively. So I feel like the operative has options to lay low and be relatively safe early on, and then get value later on, which is what I'm hoping to be able to get with her. I also just think she's a really flexible model and is a bit more dynamic than some of the other 5-stone models in the game right now. The ability to score and deny pretty easily is something I value highly in a cheap model. So these are reasons why I've lent on her.
Okay, that's fair. And we see Winston, Auto, Irina. I know she's a favourite of yours, fair enough. Rifleman, we've seen you play before. Operative, you just explained. So that leaves us with Hand of Janus and Host Ducat. So Hand of Janus surprises me a little bit in the sense that it's a bit like if I'm playing Yoko 2, people are already tending to build for Hinamatsu. They're aware that an Armor 2 model is coming, and so they're going to bring some kind of answer to that, be that like ping damage or anti-armor or whatever. And so I wouldn't be necessarily reaching quickly for, let's bring another Armor 2 model. So what was it that made you, despite people knowing full well that Sovereign's going to be there, reach for Hand of Janus?
Yeah, I feel like there's 2 ways to look at answering Sovereign. You either try and outvalue her, or you try and delete her with anti-armor. If you've brought a good anti-armor option that can delete Sovereign, it could also delete Hand of Janus, but it can't delete both in one turn. And if it flubs, then it hasn't achieved either. And so I feel as though, while yes, things that are good against her should in theory be good against him also, some of like the chip damage won't apply because he ignores hazardous, for example. So that was the source of the chip damage. He doesn't care. And he can also be a lot safer at range. It's 12 inches and heal himself also. The other interesting thing about Hand of Janus is if Melissa charges in like half health sim, right? Trying to delete him, does 6 damage. You've now procced his grit, which means he's free to just go berserk and machine gun your team, or punch you in the face really hard, and then heal himself afterwards. Host Ducat, who you've also mentioned, can also heal him afterwards and give him concealing. We like that against Melissa. But also, none of his models ignore cover. So he might be a giant height 4 robot, but if he can get cover, he's going to add that extra negative modifier to the damage flip. The 246 on Melissa, if he spikes the mod, if he spikes the severe, I'll be sad.
Yeah.
But if he's ignoring armor and he hits weak because of cover, especially because he has no blow to hell and no focus, then it's looking really good for me. And then he spent 12 stones to counter something that is cheaper than Melissa is, while also having excess funds. So I often look at Hand of Janus as like an 8.5 stone model, kind of. He's not, but he kind of is, because excess funds is really strong. So I kind of value that at about 1.5 soul stones. And so, yes, he's got tools to potentially really hurt either or both of them. It's not in the same camp as like Levy or Mad Dog, who do have blow to hell and do have the ability to give multiple plus flips to damage. And so they can just say, no, you die. I've got much more agency. I'm going to look really silly now if I lose Sovereign or Hand of Janus turn 1 after saying all of this. But I feel like
that's the curse of a pre-interview, I'm afraid. Like, yeah, you just have to. I think the best thing to do is forget about that and just say it, just stand by it. That's the.
Exactly. Hodge is objectively the correct choice here, and I'll own that. Take it to the grave. I'll die on that hill.
There you go. That's the way to do it. That's it. We've got to stay on brand. So his crew. Let's have a look. Let's go over to that Dashel crew. I'll bring it up for those of you at home. We have Dashel 2 lead line coat with the dispatcher. Obviously, we've got the executioner with the lead line coat. We have mounted guard. We have this pre-mentioned very expensive Melissa Core with expert marksman, and then we've got the Nightcrawler network and the DCU. Was there any of that you were not expecting?
Yeah, Melissa Core caught me off guard, to be honest. I don't look at her in the same way as I do Mad Dog, because she's nowhere near as reliable as he is at just deleting armored units.
Okay.
Especially because there's no focus access here. You could go Melissa with Stewie to give her 1 or 2 focus. That's spending a lot of resources out of keyword just for that package, sure. And it still doesn't ignore cover. So she did surprise me here. I haven't seen a lot of Melissa Core specifically for armor. Sometimes Cackle and Brendan will play her just as a generalist run and gun model, which is pretty good. Mm-hmm. But not necessarily with expert marksman, which is investing even more into this model, which at the end of the day is a potentially good model. It still just has 2 AP.
And what were you expecting instead, the Rider or something else?
You could bring Rider, yes. I thought Rider's more likely if it's Dashel 1, to be fair, because he comes with his own lead line code for free, kind of. So then you've got effectively 1 more you can distribute. I was actually really, really worried about the Peacekeeper. No one seems to ever talk about it, which I'm okay with because I hate that thing. It terrifies me. That's partially why I brought Hodge, to have something that can handle it. Earlier in this tournament, Landon used the Peacekeeper. I believe it might have been against you, actually, where he put on no prisoners. And to me, that thing, with or without no prisoners, I just do not kill it. And yes, I can stun it. If it gets to activate with Flurry, Anya's dead. Like, it just doesn't matter. So I was fearing that model more than anything else that Guild had to offer. Significantly more than Melissa, that's for sure.
Okay. So Peacekeeper as the sort of like the dog that didn't bark in this case. So that's an interesting one. Cool. All right. So we mentioned going back to the StarCraft reference, we mentioned the macro side of things, a turn 5 plan. So let's finish up with that. I'm going to bring up for you folks at home the map so that we can have a vague idea of what's going on there, and I'll get Tiny Michael back in the court. There we are. How do we see turns 1 and 2 going? Let's start with the unpack and the opening. Is it hide behind sizable building hope? For those at home, I think I've been told you are in the top and he's in the south, right?
Yes, correct.
Right, okay. So what's the plan?
So my plan will be to get cover for Sovereign and Hand of Janus early. If I see an opportunity to kill a camera bot before it activates with Sovereign, I'll go for that early. I don't mind activating what might seem like prematurely to kill that before it goes. Thunderstruck is really good against camera bots. They have to flip a 13 or they die. So I will happily do that. Part of that unpack will be Sovereign using, ideally, Fly With Me to bring Anya further forward, which just gives me more options. And then try use a Thunderstruck if we're in range. If we're not in range after that, we might need to walk to hide. So we may not get the opportunity. It might be possible, depending on where Melissa is in relation to Sovereign, that I could do both, like walk and then Thunderstruck. That would be nice. But generally, we're just trying to play safe with these models. I think if we can get 3 activations each out of Sovereign and Hand of Janus, we're in a really, really good spot. Those are the models which are maybe hardest in some ways to keep alive. But because of their high armor value, if I can leverage what is hitting them at which time, in some ways, they're actually easier to keep alive. Also, in Sovereign's case, you'll move 7, so you can often dictate where stuff happens. Sadly, Dashel 2 is also move 7 with the repeat again trigger. So if he really wants to, he can missile him in and just probably delete the bird. That's an option too.
Okay.
But then he's really committed, and I think those are good cards or stones to get that trigger. So maybe that's okay with me. So other than that, the other main principle is I want Anya front and center. Yes, she's really squishy. Yes, you can chunk her for like 5 or 6 damage quite easily, but I've got lots of healing that can heal her, and she can spend soul stones, and not much else can spend soul stones. So I kind of want to offer him up Anya.
It's almost a bit of a bait, like not quite, but almost sort of baiting with the master, basically.
Yeah.
Like, here's a little thing. Would you like a tasty morsel? Like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I know she will take a lot of damage if she gets swung at, but the combination of stones, a good defense stat, and hard to kill means she probably won't just accidentally die, even to like some insane flips. And by positioning her not super aggressively, but proactively forward in the middle, it just gives her a lot of options. If I delay her activation towards the tail end of the turn, she's got the whole board to play with, especially if I'm looking to maybe go with her early in turn 2. So we have the option to position to kill the Nightcrawler network start of turn 2, potentially, if we're in the right position, or to disrupt and kill like a mounted guard. We can go and stun his master. So I kind of just want to fling Anya forward, keep Hodge and Sovereign relatively safe if possible. Or if we can't do that, warp his game style to like all in those models and punish him.
Right, so you got a couple of options depending on how he approaches the game. Because I mean, I suppose you never know what your opponent's plan is until you've seen it, right? So you need to sort of at least have an idea. If he does this, then this, and if he does that, then that, right? Fair. And which two? So you mentioned that I can't remember if I actually got the. So to come back to it briefly, you mentioned that you wanted to go for 2 VP schemes because a draw isn't in your favour, and so you were considering presumably. Well, which two do you consider your 2 most likely 2 VP schemes to actually manage?
So I think Ensnare is very doable and pretty easy for this crew, and then Information Overload is also good. Yes, Dashel has great anti-scheme tech. It's all on Dashel and the Executioner. No one else is great at it. Those are really good at it. He only has 3 stones. Those models, if they're doing their job, will be fighting me anyway, so I should be able to neutralize them a little bit. And in the case of Dashel, for him to remove scheme markers, he would need to activate, which could potentially trigger Ensnare anyway. So I am comfortable with that. And I guess one other consideration is, like, you might think, don't bring schemes because they obviously can eat schemes quite easily, and even Dasher 1 can summon off schemes. Yes, this is all true. However, they kind of want to do it to the dispatcher to draw their card. So when you offer them up a scheme, they are now having to play around that scheme rather than getting their card off of the dispatcher. So you are taking away a little bit of the value engine. I did consider some of things like Sweating Bullets or Take Prisoner. Ultimately, I feel like those are just 1-point schemes most likely for me, and therefore just too unreliable. I need to go big and try and get the 2-point schemes if I can.
Okay. I mean, I suppose the things change if your plan is murder the dispatcher. If you go into a game saying, I have a plan, I have a model, I have maybe 2 models, I'm going to kill that dispatcher, then it's like, right, well, now I really need to avoid giving him schemes because I've invested a lot into removing his potential to use enemy schemes at all, and now I really don't want to give them. But if you're not planning to touch the dispatcher, then, you know, the difference is between him drawing a card or not, I suppose, to some extent. Although Trail of Gore, you know, always makes everyone nervous, as well it should, but that's more about positioning of schemes rather than them being on the table at all, I suppose. Right. Okay.
Yes,
okay.
This is true. I also think on the case of Trail of Gore, it's really good anti-scheme tech. It looks a lot worse when you're stunned because it's just a swing. So it's like, yeah, I've got decent tech here also. I don't know if I'll be able to stun him every turn, of course. That's probably unlikely and unrealistic, but I've got the option to do that. So Trail of Gore, while it is really strong, probably isn't as strong as it might normally feel in this kind of pool.
Yeah, I mean, and stun is one of the, probably, I think most people would agree, the strongest condition in the game. So it's if you can hand that out, then you're on a winner. Okay, so we've covered turn 1, and then moving into turn 2, obviously things now start to enter a very theoretical land. But where is it that you're thinking, right, I need to, is there some positioning that's really key to you? Like, I really want to get this model out to a side, or what's vital to your turn 2?
So unless he spent a lot of stones turn 1, my plan turn 2 is to get between the Executioner and Dashel so that the Executioner can't stone for cards, and then just kill him. Just pop him. There's no Hitamatas or anything like that to make me not want to kill him. We have an anti-hard to kill trigger on Irina. So if she's got like a focus and we get him down to like a 3rd wounds, I can just walk there and remove him. Anya has a billion instances of ping damage. So if we can just remove his ability to use stones, which is either destroy all the stones or get between him and Dashel, just get rid of him if we can at all. That'll be important to controlling the center, especially if, as I suspect, he might be the Sweating Bullets target. So that's the main positional thing I'm thinking about. How do I play around and potentially isolate the two of them? I want to have probably Irina on one of the flanks, just dominating that flank, where unless it is the Executioner fighting her, or maybe Dashel, she will beat up any other model quite comfortably. And then she can just dominate that flank by herself. So that's probably a good way to spend that 8 stones. And then from there, it's just going to be fighting opportunistically. I think the rest of my crew is designed in such a way that all models can score and all models can threaten parts of his crew. I don't have like a botanist here, which is just run, and interact. We've got options to do the same thing with the rifleman, or like an ambush walk interact with the operative, but at the same time, we could use arson. We could use like a double ski marker trick with the operative to score and snare out of nowhere, for example. Like we've got a number of tools in our bag. So we're probably going to be playing turn 2 and 3 onwards quite opportunistically, seeing where there's opportunities to get activation control. And if possible, put the Nightcrawler network in the ground, as long as it's safe to do so.
And how do we envision doing that? Because that is a model that is well, frankly, needs a look at. And one of the reasons it needs a look at is because it can sit wherever the hell it wants and do whatever it wants. And as we've, I didn't maybe agree with you strongly enough at the time, but trust me, I do, that if it suddenly lives all the way to turn 5 on a Cloak and Dagger strategy, that's a difficult thing to overcome. So what's putting the Nightcrawler in the ground?
So it's a lot of AP, but Anya can definitely do it. With Bleeding Edge, having your place trigger with Steel Momentum, that's kind of like a leap. And the ability to Blade Rush through models, she can get into its guts relatively easily. Yes, extended reach is not fun, but we've got the option to get there at least because we're really fast. So if we include something like a mid-turn 2, for example, Dirigible Riot to, I don't know, heal Anya and throw her beyond the front melee, and then start her activation with all her AP, enough cards to get where she needs to go, I could envisage her having 2 swings at him quite easily. Will she kill him in 2 swings? Probably not. So maybe what I would do is take 1 swing and stun him while getting additional value with her other AP, whatever that may look like, maybe putting Hazard Ski Marker under his base, and then just stand there engaging him. Because for all his wonderful value, he doesn't himself have Don't Mind Me, and he doesn't have a like absolutely free way to leave melee. He has reposition on the summon, but it's not built in. And I feel like his crew is already really desperate for masks. So he can do it, but it's going to cost him. And if I can stun him, then that trigger is irrelevant anyway, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like it's enough to engage him. Killing him would be great. Engaging him turn 2 might be enough. So that's
okay. So Anya herself would be eyeing him up as a solid target if she can like pop through that front line, as you say, and actually get to do her thing. Which I think that relatively well designs what I would say Anya one it does. She gets involved in the melee, survives, takes a lot of damage, but gets through it, and then pops through and gets into your backline, starts making a mess, and during that process slowly heals herself back up a little bit. Like that seems to be my impression of her.
Exactly. She can usually live long enough because she can spend stones, and you usually bring at least 5 or 6 for her to see 2 or 3 turns of fighting, which is usually they've spent enough resources trying to bring her down, which hasn't quite worked, that when she goes off and does something like this, a lot of those previous efforts are in vain. And it's mainly just support models that are trying to finish her off, which can struggle with the defense 6 and hard to kill.
Yeah.
You can absolutely kill her. She is one of the squishiest masters in the game, but she's not one of the squishiest models in the game. And I think to look at her as made of paper is to gloss over the tech that she does have. Again, if we can stun Nightcrawler Network with hostile work environment there, he just won't get to do his tricks. And if I can deny him even just one of those cheesy interacts at the end of the turn to like get a free token, that could be enough to just get an inch ahead. And then it's just like hold on to the 1 point advantage at that stage.
Yeah, I haven't looked at hostile work environment in this environment. I guess you have. Is there anything specific that you're attempting to deny him?
So if I'm near the Executor, he can't Trail of Gore his Dispatcher, which is kind of cute. For the same reason, because he can't target his models, right?
Yeah, but he's not targeting a model. He's targeting a scheme marker, and he's acting as a scheme. I mean, I'm thinking out loud. I'm sure you've checked this much more than I have, but are you sure that he counts as a model? If you're treating him as a scheme marker, then you're not treating him as a model.
Unclear. It's possible that you're right. I should probably get the answer.
That might be worth just checking out pre-game. Yeah.
I know that some of the folks who'd been chatting about it had mentioned that as a potential point of like value of hostile work environment. So we will see. Things like I've got your back and ride with me certainly don't work.
Sure.
So the mounted guard lose some of his efficacy. We also have the ability for walk the line on Nightcrawler Network as friendly only, not with Anya around, of course. So we've got a few instances where it matters.
Okay.
Unclear as to if it'll be game breaking because there's no Stewie here. Maybe he didn't bring Stewie because Anya usually does this to people.
Right. So his sort of friendly targeting abilities are a lot less appealing at that stage. Yeah,
Guild Steward is one of the models which Syndicate is really happy to see on the other side of the table. We just have so many good answers for it. So
fair. All right. So to bring things to a close, what game plan? What sort of if you were to try and mirror that thought process, and so what does that Dashel 2 crew want to do? Then how do you see him unpacking? And let's maybe not go into the magical la la land of 3, 4, 5 because that's reactive. But what do you think his turn 1 and 2 look like?
So I believe his unpack is going to be getting some extra movement, courtesy of rapid response and ride with me, to try and get his threat pieces up the board a bit. Even just a couple of extra inches is quite a lot on standard with relatively good bridge lanes for him to get across. So I think he's going to pick one of those 3 bridges, probably the middle, but it could be either on the side to get most of his unpack going towards. Then towards the tail end of the turn, after he's done that rapid response and that ride with me, I think we're looking at either Melissa or Executioner or Dashel getting his good cards. And trying to get a bunch of value with that, with some heavy hitting damage. I don't think his crew wants to just sort of fiddle around. He wants to inflict damage, as most guild crews do.
Sure.
So he does want some turn 1 violence. He's got many different angles he can take to enact that violence. So he's got a lot of options. But I imagine it's a case of he's pushing those models forward. He's trying to get the damage output from them after having boosted them up. And it can be difficult to stop given how fast and how far Dashel can go. But I don't know if he has enough stones to just fling Dashel in and say, YOLO, hope it's good.
Right.
So we shall see.
So it sort of you're expecting a lot of forward momentum and then looking for an opportunity for violence, and if one is given, take it.
Yeah, exactly. I think he will take what he can get. He's looking for damage. I could be wrong, but I think he just wants damage. If he can get it against the right targets, great. But I don't think he's going to take a walk charge to hit one target when a charge would let you hit 2 or 3 swings on the primary target. I think that the way that the stats line up, especially with Pursue, you just want to keep taking those opposed duels because every one that potentially slips through is yet another critical strike or an execute or a armor-piercing shot with Melissa, or in the case of Dashel, that offhand strike. That's what I fear. So if he can get that trigger against Anya twice, suddenly I'm not feeling particularly durable. So the more he can force that through by taking lots of attacks, I feel like that's the better option for him.
Right. He's not in the case that you maybe consider yourself where Nightcrawler Network has to die. He's in the case of I want to deal so much overwhelming damage and pressure, and who it's on isn't necessarily the main thing. Of course, he has preferred targets, but you'd be expecting him to go for where he's going to do the most rather than for one particular model. With the exception of Melissa that you've already mentioned, like obviously she's intended to do some armor piercing, so we would really expect her to try and hit Sovereign or Hand. Yeah. Oh, fair enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the case.
All right. So the last thing is I've got a little idea, which of course it is the MWS finals, so you can feel more than free to completely ignore this. But I think we should try and get a side game going on, which is we're going to throw in some hidden words. So during the game, you're going to have 3 words that you need to try and weave into the game. Your opponent has his own 3 words. And so he's aware that you have 3 words, and so if you can get them in without being called out, then you score a point. So it's a point per word. If he calls you out on it and says, "I think that's one of your hidden words," or something to that effect, then -2 points. So you're immediately screwed. And if you attempt to call him out on a word and it is not one of his 3 words, that's -1 point. So there's a real high chance for some minus points. It's quite difficult to end up with a positive score. So you decide what's more important. Is it the mini game or the finals? Anyway, so I have 3 words ready for you. So we have the gazelle.
Okay, he's going to know that one immediately, but I love it. Okay.
None of these are particularly easy, man. You've got to really try and weave them in. The other one is Colorado. You might, he's from the US. You might be able to weave that one in. That might be if you can find a way to make that work. And the other one is nipple. And or nipples.
Oh yes.
You can you feel free.
That one's good. That's easy. One's easy.
There you go. All right. So you've got 3 points up for grabs, and feel free to, if you feel suspicious about something that he says during the game, feel free to call him on it.
I'm going to be focusing far too much on that than the actual game now, but I love it. So I'm up for the challenge.
That's it. I've derailed the finals immediately. Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining, and I really do wish you the very best of luck in the game. I realised that my vote was on. Oh, by the way, yeah, that's one more thing I forgot to ask. There was a vote. I put it up on the MWS, and you took, I think, almost exactly 2/3 of the popular vote. So you're no longer the underdog. You are only the Grogdog. Yeah. What was your feeling about that?
I want to be the underdog every time. I have to have that status to give me power. So everyone wrote off Anya in both the games I was playing,
including me.
Exactly right, and the ability to achieve a win when it's that kind of, people are looking at it thinking that's not a good choice or that's a weird off-meta choice. It shouldn't be that great. I like that status, that dark horse status, and so when I'm the favorite, I feel under a lot of pressure. So why did you guys vote for me?
Well, there we go. I'm feeling bad. I've sabotaged the game. I've sabotaged it twice now. I've sabotaged it with a vote and now a side game. I'm gonna get carded. All right. Thank you so much for joining. Anything? Guys, Pack Mentality. That is the podcast that Michael is a host of. You can find them on Spotify. Anywhere else?
We're on Spotify. We're on Apple podcasts as well. I believe we're also on Podbean. So any of the main channels, you'd be able to find us if you search up Pack Mentality. But Spotify is our usual bread and butter.
Super. And best of luck in the finals. And this one will be going out along with that finals. So obviously do check out that game. I'm sure it will be a banger. Last thing then, the very, very last thing, expected score.
Oh man, I'm gonna end up with some egg in my face if I'm like, it'll be a narrow 7-6 win, and then he just blows me out 6-0.
Again, you've just got to own it. That's
I've got to own it, and I think if I own it, my win looks like a 5-3 or a 5-4 kind of win, where I need to spend a lot to just stop him scoring, rather than just I go for 8 and let him get 8 because then he just wins anyway. So that's the kind of scoreline I predict I need to be trying to gravitate towards, just like I did against Andre, to like just win.
And just in case you happen to nail it dead on the money, are we going for 5-3 or 5-4? Because I can't let you take credit for both.
Let's say 5-4.
5-4
is my predicted to Grogdog. It's me.
5-4 to Grogdog. Right. On that, we will end. Thank you very much. Take care.
Cheers, mate.